think the sound is okay. So Daniel did a very good presentation of about the first 5 minutes of my of my workshop. But I think the key point is that what we want and we need is a way of stepping away from the need of end-to-end testing, and in particular of building complex testing environment that each one typically builds in their own projects, but having something that is community-based that people can contribute to. In particular, the classical example is you fix a bug and you raise a pull request or you implement a new feature, and it's a nice way to integrate the code with something that can be practically seen, but at the same time in a sort of containerized, isolated environment. I had also a presentation. I think I can skip. So first of all, I wanted to mention a few projects I've been working on, mainly because they've been and they are large projects where Kamailio is a key point. And for the second reason is also for the people that I've been lucky enough to work with, which are present today and will be some more tomorrow. And just to break the ice, one of the questions that typically people ask me when I say I live in Sardinia is it that island? And I say it's the other one, so it's the one more west. The other frequent question is, do you spend most of your time at the beach? And the answer, unfortunately, is not. So the agenda of presenting a little bit the project and the project structure, and where Docker has a role in it, presenting very quickly the current test scenarios, and in particular how new tests can be added, and the contribution that everybody can have on this project. I wanted to mention this because I think this is another key point that I always end up asking myself and some good colleagues. And I think a good testing framework would help us reducing the number of times we ask this question. So what we want to test with this framework is there are various points. One is, for example, the core functionalities, but also some specific functionalities for modules. In particular, there is already included DB access for what concerns MySQL. And another thing that you can test indirectly is the built-in dependencies, and I'll show you some examples. The natural evolution of this is that then you can run regression testing in a proper way, so that even if you have contributed one test because you were interested in that one test, but there are 99 tests, then you can run the full regression suite, and you can also verify that you haven't broken anything else. And this can be easily automated. So we won't present it here, but it's the way it works makes it easy to automate in the typical tools like Jenkins or Travis. And as I mentioned, and Daniel also, the idea is that we reduce the amount of end-to-end testing that we do. We move the testing to an early phase, and then of course each one will have end-to-end testing, but not as the only source of confirmation for the code. Jumping quickly in how this is based, so we can see some examples running in real time. So this is in the project. All the units are in a folder. There is the name of the unit, and there is a main script that is supposed to be run inside the container, and we'll see how. Sometimes it's necessary to have a specific routing script for Kamailio, and the structure will be this one, Kamailio dash the name of the unit, and the README is well accepted to give more indications to the other contributors. And this is the format of the unit, so that we have something that it's easy it's easier to automate if we have a common format. It's just very simple. Some part dedicated to the test of the name. For example, it could be a specific module that we want to test, and then we can dedicate 4 digits to enumerate the numbers of tests that belong to that same area. And there's an example for a generic test related to configuration. If you see, I don't know if you see it well, but let's see it live. So, just an example of. Let's look at this one because I will be showing something else later on. So this is a very simple structure that it's very easy to replicate. So there are some utility functions at the beginning, and then we run Kamailio in this case with a custom routine script, and we just pipe the log to a temporary log file. And then with zipsack, we send a simple command just to trigger the functionality. We don't need anything intelligent in this phase, like a specific format of the zip signaling. This will trigger logging something in the log file, and then we can just kill Kamailio and grep for the log, and then there will be the phase where it's decided whether the test passed or not. And this is the same structure that we can replicate in any other test, even the new ones. I mentioned, so there were 2 utilities, etc config and etc utils, where we can just simplify our lives, put in some variables. But then the main component here is the testctl, which is the main script that it's meant to execute the tests. By default, it will execute all the tests, but you can specify a specific one. And then there are a few options in terms of whether you want it to be very verbose, or in case it's needed to have MySQL running, you can run it, or save some time and not running it. And then recently we added this option. I don't know how much it's visible, but it's just a text file where we can list a number of units that we don't want to be triggered. There may be many reasons why we don't want that. It could be related to some dependencies that are missing, some module that it's not mature. So in this case, for CentOS, I'm excluding tphone, the test related to tphone number, because I still need to figure out how to properly install libphone number on CentOS. While at the same time, all the unit tests are running without exceptions for Debian. Very quickly, the current units that you can probably see already. So there is something related to how the variables can be defined and then read, and what the value is after triggering a synchronous root for the async module. Authorization using the database. Testing the default Kamailio config file, which can be very useful also for what then get pushed as the default or the example Kamailio config file. And there are 2 examples. GeoIP2 triggers a lookup and then verifies the result. And ACL settings, and an attempt to basically load all the modules in order to verify that are actually properly running and launching depending on that distribution. and that build. The new one, there is a new one related to the phone number module, and then a one to verify the insertion of a contact in user lock. Of course, there are just 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. There is a lot that can be added, and I think the phone number one is just comes out of a bug fix, and it was added while fixing that. So if you consider adding one, the minimum amount of work is just adding the folder inside the units directory and then the script. Optionally, sometimes it's needed to have a specific Kamailio routing file, and of course, if the module needs anything specific for being built, there will be the need to add the dependencies for the module, and deciding also if the module has to go into the list of excluded modules when building Kamailio. And the process becomes, if you want to use the term TDD in test-driven development, you can even start writing the test, seeing it fail, changing the test or the configuration, and then iterate on that. Until you're happy with that, you can raise a PR against the Kamailio tests project. And once, typically, most of the people just focus on one distribution, but it would be very nice if you work on a bug fix or a feature and you are providing the unit test for an OS distribution, if you could also look for other distributions. Currently, there are Debian 9 and CentOS 7 supported. So the role of Docker, probably for many, it's obvious. The main points are that at least at this level of project, it's very easy to use. It's easy to test and launch containers with based on different distributions, and it's easy also to integrate with continuous integration systems. The workflow is very intuitive. You just develop the changes. We will see it together in runtime. You build a base image, and after you have the base image that it was built correctly, you run the container, and inside the container, you launch the test scripts. So this is one of the advantages is that you may have all the environment in your laptop. So I could, for example, test some units on the plane. Unless you need to upgrade any library, you can really be isolated and just run it. And it's easy to collaborate because you can share the Dockerfiles or the images. And it comes also handy. This is why I mentioned that as a build infrastructure or artifacts. One of the typical reasons why I use Docker is for as a build machine for artifacts. So you can build the RPMs or the Debian packages, and for fast prototyping. So I think once you have this tool in your day-to-day environment, it's easy also to use it for this project as well. Getting a little bit more into the details, so the Docker files are just text files where you define all the operations that need to be performed in order to build the test environment. The typical Docker file that we're using now, first of all, installs all the base libraries for building Kamailio and the related modules, because we will be building Kamailio when building the image. And then it will install MySQL and zipsack, which at the moment is used to generate some zip traffic, and other libraries like Giacomo 2. Then the current Kamailio source code is copied inside the image. This is very handy because it doesn't mean that the source code you're working on must be already committed in a repo. You can have your personal version, it could be a fork, a branch, or even something that you have changed locally. This process will copy the source code into the image and then we'll build it. Together with that, also the units will be will be copied inside the image, and then there is just an entry point defined, which is a sort of default command that can be executed. And let's see a little, just quickly, I don't know, the Docker file for Debian. And you can see, first of all, I think this is a very good approach of having one library per line and in alphabetical order, so it's easier to review and see the changes. First of all, of course, it's based on a chosen base distribution. In this case, Debian Stretch. The libraries that are required to build Kamailio are installed, and then there's the configuration of MySQL, and zipsuck is installed from source, Geolite from source, and then Kamailio is built with a specific list of modules that are excluded. And then the units are pushed into the image, and the file with a list of units that we don't want to run are copied there. And then the entry point is also a trick to protect the image, so that this is the only command, this is the only, basically, the base command that you can execute. And then what comes next the command, it's the default command, in this case, launch MySQL and run all the unit tests, but that can be then overridden at launch time. One interesting thing, I don't know if I should have it in the slides. Yes, so building the image is very easy. So it's just Docker build with a tag that we pass, and then that dot represents just saying build the context here in this local folder. If we want to do something a little bit more articulate, it could be that we define the Docker file rather than copying it in the local folder. We refer to it with the -f tag. As I mentioned, you don't need to have you are not cloning the code. You are working on the code that is being cloned in your local machine. So you just copy it, and then it will be built. And you can be a little bit more creative with the tags. So you can have at the same time various versions of the images, perhaps with a different branch of Kamailio, or a different solution of the work you're working on. With a different tag, you will be running the tests on top of a different image. So the images, the Docker images tend to grow large. There are a few tricks. There are still improvements that can be done at the moment, but in general, there are a few tricks just to keep the images small. And so in general, every command in a Docker file generates a layer. So even if you install a library, you uninstall it and you install it again, just to give an example, those will be 3 layers, and their size will add up. So it's important to try and minimize the number of actions that are performed, and in particular, for example, having the update and the installation and the cleanup in the same command. The other thing that is probably more important from a practical point of view is that Docker build does a sort of caching. So it doesn't necessarily rebuild everything from scratch when you rerun the Docker build command. And this is very useful because sometimes you want to change what's on the bottom, which is the unit, for example, without rebuilding Kamailio, which takes some time. And the cache can be invalidated explicitly, just passing no cache through. Or if you change anything at some point in Docker file, which could be even setting a different value for a variable, or if the context of the build, that is the files that are copied or added, change. We will see, well, we can see, I think we have time to see an example. So in this case, I think here we can rerun the Docker build operation on top of the Debian 9, targeting the related Docker file. And in this case, it will build the context, but at the same time, since there haven't been any changes, it will just apply, you can see, using cache at each layer. It will apply the cache and basically reuse what's already existing. If instead, for any reason, say we want to do something different with the CentOS base, like for example, I want to delete. Let's say we want to delete the one based on CentOS, because we want to be sure that the new code is pulled and the new libraries are installed. I will stop the it doesn't allow you to delete an image if it's been used. Or even in other conditions. But I didn't want to force, but what I can do is I can invalidate somehow the cache. Let me try with forcing. Okay. So that if you want to build it again from scratch, it will be something like docker build -t, Kamailio tests 7 -f tests. In this case, it will load again the, it will reuse the, okay, I haven't. Okay, so I've invalidated just explicitly the cache, and then it will start again by installing all the dependencies, and we can leave it for that. It will take some time. In particular, if there is an error, it goes out immediately. Well, okay, but it doesn't. Something not quite right. Anyway, let's see the run phase. So on top right, you can see just the default run command when all the units will be run in verbose mode. But you can also specify a specific unit, and with -q you will have a quiet output. So in practice, if we go back to Debian, so we can do docker run tests 9x like this. And this will run all the units in verbose mode with also MySQL running, which is the default command. At the end, there will be a report so that you can act on the failing tests if needed, and then we can see just running one single test, and perhaps we can add one if we have time. Okay, so this is the report, and the ones that we want to run have all run successfully. We can see, for example, we could be more in quiet mode. We could just run the one related to the phone number. And it is just this one. So in this case, it's very useful if you are just working on a single unit. You can minimize the amount of time that it requires to rerun the tests. Granted that you are not changing also the module code, of course. In that case, Kamailio needs to be rebuilt. And if we, for example, say we want to change one of the units, this is the one testing phone number. Say for any reason you have a doubt and you want to verify something that appears to be trickier than it should, like Italian landline numbers that have 0 after the country code. You can just change it, and you will have to rebuild the image so that the new unit will be copied, and you can see it's using all the cache until the end when the source of the unit is being put into the image, and then you can just rerun that specific unit test. So it's easy to change, and possibly in this case, I'm just making an example, it would have been more appropriate to generate a new folder. In that case, I think it's intuitive. This is just the structure of the folder. It's the script and the specific Kamailio script to trigger that functionality. Okay, this, we saw it in real time. Launch a specific unit, we saw it in real time, and the reasons why you may want to exclude a specific unit, it could be that it's just functionality that is not available or not available for that distribution. You just define at least one per line. You name them into the exclude units txt for that distribution, and they will be ignored. In terms of future development, of course, I think one of the things that may change could be even something more architectural around this. But of course, there are just so few unit tests that you may imagine that adding them will be the first step, first of all. And then, of course, more complex scenarios where we don't just need to trigger a routine script for Kamailio, but also we are interested in understanding what's the response. And so CP or even PJ-SUA that Julian mentioned could come handy. And then even more complex if Kamailio is interacting with HTTP endpoints. The integration with Jenkins shouldn't be problematic because this is just basically shell scripts with a return code. So this should be straightforward, but additional OS support would be very welcome because at the moment it's just Debian 9 and CentOS 7, and I guess there are already a few ideas coming from the audience. And these are the conclusions. I don't know if I used all my time or.
5 minutes for discussion, okay, to see if people have improvements and so on. So
yeah, sure.
We are not really like strict constraints, but so finish, and then if people want to see how to add unit test or discuss about it, we can do that.
Okay.
Will be less for my workshop, so.
Yes, this was just a summary. So getting back to the initial point of limiting as much as possible end-to-end testing and having something that can be used, and in particular having regression tests for functionality. Probably one topic to discuss could be the naming, because unit tests sometimes give the expectation of testing during the build. This could be functional testing or component testing, but again, it's open for discussion, I guess. So there will be, I think, in the next 2 days, there will be also something related, which is the work that the EvoSIP has been doing, because their infrastructure is based on containers, Kamailio inside containers, and of course they needed to automate the testing, so they did some work that is similar, and possibly we can have some links there. And also 2 years ago I presented something similar in a workshop, and this was mainly focused on testing the HTTP async client interacting with an HTTP API. In that case, it wasn't everything inside a container, but it was more modularized with CP in a dedicated container, Kamailio in another one, and then there was a Node.js responding to there. And I think that was closer to end-to-end testing than the Kamailio test framework that we have presented today. And I guess any question you may have.
Yeah, I have one. First was Victor, then Tom.
Hello. So maybe it's I quite don't understand why you need to build again and again the image if you are hacking the tested. You know what I mean? Why don't you use volumes? So you have the testing in a volume, and actually you can have the Kamailio build in another volume.
Yes.
So we use Docker to do the CI. Yeah. So you can just use the Docker image because it has all the libraries and everything, the environment. So it's just build, then you have the build in the volume, then just run another one if you want, or just run. Actually, you need to run another one, because if you are using zip or zipsack or whatever, but you only need the tools, the utils you need to run, and then you just need again and again.
I think it's a good point. So the question was, why are you rebuilding the image if you are working on the unit tests? Why not using, for example, a volume, so that you work on the code, the volume will share the code inside the container when you run it. Yes, it's a good point. It could be easily changed. You see that the unit tests are copied inside the image at the end. So if you rebuild, you are actually just rebuilding the last phase where you are using the cache for everything apart from that. It depends also how you want to use the image. Are you going to reuse the same image elsewhere, or are you happy with having the unit tests locally? It depends on the collaboration model, but I think we can easily discuss that.
But then I have a question, because I'm not actually a Docker guy. I'm using it, but I'm not, let's say, evolved. So with these volumes, practically you compile it on your host system, right? So then I would need to have Debian to compile it.
No. You are compiling the Kamailio thing in the Docker, but it's locally.
And keep it locally.
Yeah, but so you can just
push config into a Docker image.
Okay. We need, it's pull request open there. It's not a problem.
I know.
It was more like adapting what, as I said at the beginning, what Henning built before, because I needed to test some people reporting some crashes, and I was really not willing to break my main database system.
Yeah, but the good thing is if we can do that, you can easily reuse the package Kamailio that we use in Travis. So it's exactly the same thing. You just need to use this one to build Kamailio, then you just need to run another one with the same volume, and that's it.
Okay,
You don't need to...
Perfect.
Actually, you can hack, then build again, and that's it. You don't need to run again and again the building process.
That was the goal of this workshop, and it's why I invited him, because he's more into this. It was to move it forward, because in the past we discussed at these devel meetings many times, like building, but someone suggested like a robot framework from Python, but then you need to learn that language. Someone suggested something else, and as we had the one from Henning, I said, okay, let's isolate it with Docker. But then again, I got to Giacomo rather late into the project to answer me some question with Docker, but this is like the start, and we can change it dramatically if people have better solutions.
Actually, I was thinking in the Jenkins integration, then we have to have like tab for the results, and that's easily to parse afterwards, and then Jenkins can give you, okay, this is the test that failed and everything.
It looks like you are going to be busy next week.
Yeah, I know.
With the tab protocol. If you look back at the infrastructure for the workshop of 2 years ago, you will see that in that case I'm using volumes, but that was more distributed, and this wants to be just one single thing that you run there, and once you have the image, you can run it again in another machine, for example, for collaboration. But it's a good moment. I think it's a good moment in the project.
Okay.
Hey, I'm just wondering, when I see the test you wrote for your phone number test there, that basically you spawn Kamailio, you sleep for 1 second, you run zipzak, and then sleep and kill, and then look at a log file. Is that how you plan on like doing most of your tests, or?
So maybe I can answer on that. So basically, this was done, I don't know, maybe 8-9 years ago. So they are, in the moment, it's still in the code, there are like 40-50 different tests, and some are like this. Okay, just test if you can register a number, if you can call them with zipzak. Some tests are okay, try to load a stock config with like all the modules that are available and see if we can load them. Yeah. Another test is try to execute some basic security test messages if we get a crash or stuff like this. But it's still, I mean, it's 8 years old. So it probably needs to be extended, needs to be modernized, and this is the first, more like the approach in Docker. And then we can build on that to extend and create more test cases. At the moment, that's in the code what we have, but of course it needs to be extended.
The one with why killing it after is that operation should happen, and we parse the logs because we print from that small config file. So it's what we expected to happen, some log file. But as Henning mentioned, there is one that is actually not starting Kamailio, but is searching for missing symbols errors. So, you compile it, it's all fine, but you forgot to link against some library, and sometimes we had even like release going out because we compiled it due to some last merge or maybe a new version of a library, which then had an extra dependency. And then compiles, no issues, and then you see at startup missing a symbol. So depends on the test you want to do. You may grep for the log messages, or you just see Kamailio has started, or
or you get a proper zip message.
I'm just wondering, because there are two ways to do unit tests. In this case, what you're doing there in a large bunch of the cases, you're testing if some library you're using actually does what it's supposed to do, because then you can test if it still works with the new version, which is more of an integration test.
He said that we should call it maybe functional testing, or we need to find a different name. This is actually, the repository is Kamailio tests, doesn't have, I call it based on Henning's work, which was like test unit or something like that. I kind of use the same terminology, but it's not like
it's not set in
yes,
stone.
in fact,
I mean, yeah.
probably units is only used probably apart in the README as the folder for. So that would be easy to change if we want to change another approach. It can be misleading, yes.
It's also just interesting. I just wonder if you had any thoughts about if this was the test you wanted to perform, or if it would be more like testing Kamailio's own code.
I mean, yeah,
stuff like that.
I think that's at another level.
I mean, yeah, as you mentioned, this is done on the Kamailio level. It's still like the complete Kamailio with some modules, the core, logging subsystem, database, etc. So it's still like more like an integration test, what you normally would call it. If you want to do like proper unit tests, then we need to like build a test harness for like dialog module, TM module, then just start TM, feed some messages, feed some data, and get to the results. This is not what is planned here. This is more like the integration test.
Yeah, because that would require you to rewrite a lot of modules, I think.
Yeah, it's
interesting. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Maybe one more question, or here, Tom behind. And then next speaker needs to prepare.
Thank you. So do you have some way to reset the test environment after each test? So as I see, you run one script after the another. So possibly the second script writes in the same log file like the first script did, or you're reusing the database. So could be that one test pollutes the database with some result where the next test has a problem with. So do you plan somehow to reset this environment?
That's a good point. So the question is, what happens with the test environment when you run a test and then afterwards you run another one? Is the test environment clean at that point? At the moment, it's managed inside the script. So for example, each one will write in its own log file so that it won't be reading in the log file written by another unit. And also at the database level, at the moment, there isn't an infrastructure to do that. It's demanded, it's delegated to the person writing the script. But it's a good point. That could be a level of the utilities. So there could be a utility that programmatically, at the beginning and at the end, ensures that it's clean when you start and it's cleaned up when you finish.
I mean, this was one of the bad design points in the old framework, that exactly this happened. So you have like one test, which inserts something in the database, and then you need to clean up manually afterwards so that the next test can run independently from that. So this is something we could do much better probably with Docker. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Giacomo, and